Procedure and House Affairs. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 3, the committee is meeting on its study of challenges regarding special ballot voting. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person, and theoretically they are attending using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I'd ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the back of the cards of the tables. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and protect the health and safety of all participants involved, especially our interpreters. There's a QR code and a video you can watch. I would recommend you do that, please. A few comments for the benefit of the members. Reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members of the room, as always, if you wish to speak, raise your hand. If you end up on Zoom at some point, use the raise hand feature. I would like to welcome our witnesses for today's first panel from the Office of the Chief Electoral Officer, Monsieur Perreault, who is the Chief Electoral Officer. Welcome back. Michel Roussel, Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, Electoral Events and Innovation, and Danielle Duquette, Special Voting Rules Administrator. I believe we received a message that your opening may be a little bit longer than usual. We will, I am using my prerogative to grant that, so please go ahead, Monsieur Perreault.
Alors, merci. Je vais essayer de garder ça dans les 5 minutes. Donc, merci,
Thank you. I will try to keep it to 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak with the committee today about its study on special ballot voting. I would first like to give a brief overview of the evolution of special ballots since the repeal of proxy voting and the expansion of the special voting rules in 1993, and then speak to special ballot voting during the 45th general election. So, the Canada Elections Act divides electors into 5 categories for the purposes of administering the special voting rules: Canadian Forces electors, international electors, incarcerated electors, national electors, and local electors. Each category has its own set of rules to administer, which can result in some complexity. Prior to 1993, Canadians living or traveling outside the country could not cast a ballot. Only military personnel and diplomats were allowed to do so. In 1993, special ballot voting was expanded to allow for voting by anyone, including Canadians living or traveling abroad. These legislative changes also provided for certain electors who are homebound to be served by special ballot by an election officer. Further legislative changes were adopted in 2018 to implement 2 Supreme Court decisions. One decision expanded the vote to all incarcerated electors. The other removed the 5-year limit for Canadians living abroad. So until then, Canadians living abroad for more than 5 years were not allowed to vote unless they were serving in the military or in the federal civil service.
Has also expanded the use of a special ballot regime to address the needs of electors facing barriers. In the 1990s, Elections Canada began to use special ballots to serve electors in hospitals. And in 2004, special ballots were used to allow workers in remote work locations such as mines to vote outside of their electoral district. In 2015, Elections Canada launched a Vote on Campus pilot project to open external service points at post-secondary institutions. Vote on Campus took place also in 2019 and in 2025. In 2019, Elections Canada offered special voting kiosks as part of an action plan to accommodate electors observing Jewish holidays. In total, there were 27 kiosks open to all eligible electors in 15 electoral districts, and more than 7,000 electors took advantage of this offering. In 2021, to ensure the safe delivery of the election during the COVID pandemic, we promoted the use of special ballots, allowing electors to vote by mail from the safety of their homes. We also improved the local vote-by-mail service by allowing local electors to apply online and provided the means to track ballots. In addition, long-term care facilities who were under quarantine were offered special ballot voting. Finally, during the last few elections, in response to exceptional circumstances where incidents such as a severe storm or flooding impacted electors' opportunity to vote, we were able to offer replacement voting options through additional service points in the use of special ballots. The use of special ballots in all of these cases allowed us to provide flexibility and remove barriers for electors. During the last election, over 1.2 million electors voted using a special ballot, more than ever before, almost double, Mr. Chair, the amount in 2019. Special ballots were integral to expanding service to electors, including through the Vote on Campus program that was offered for the first time in a non-fixed date election, and to accommodating some Indigenous communities. But the largest increase in voting was among voters who chose to vote by special ballot within their local community. The number of national and international electors also doubled. Overall, the rate of ballots returned late has decreased compared to previous elections, despite the fact that the Easter weekend interrupted mail delivery at a critical point in the electoral calendar. However, late ballots from international electors remain high, and I'd be happy to speak to that later through the questions. While the use of special ballots contributed to making the electoral process more accessible during the last election, the high volume and complexity of special ballots did result in administrative errors, which I've reported to this committee. And to make sure that special ballot voting services are adapted to this increased use by Canadians following the election, I launched an internal review of Elections Canada's training program, control mechanisms, and processes related to special ballot voting. The review is being finalized as we speak, and my team has produced a number of recommendations for improvements, which I will be happy to share with the committee very shortly. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be happy to answer questions. If it is appropriate, Mr. Chair, I would invite members to direct their questions to me, and of course my officials will intervene as appropriate or as required.
Thank you so much. Mr. Cooper for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome back to committee, Mr. Perot. The riding in which a Canadian living abroad votes in is determined on their last place of address in Canada. The Elections Canada application for registration to vote abroad requires a prospective elector to provide proof of Canadian citizenship. However, the application does not require that a prospective elector provide proof of their last place of residence in Canada. So, without such proof, how does Elections Canada verify that a prospective elector is providing their actual real last place of residence in Canada and voting in the appropriate riding?
So thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Chair, the regime is designed in recognition of the fact that people living abroad and who have lived abroad perhaps for a long time often will not have documentary proof of residence. So their application serves as the means to determine where they will vote. The critical point is that once they have registered on the international register at a particular location, they may not move that. They cannot change until they come back to Canada to reside. And so there is no opportunity to further, change electoral districts for perhaps political considerations.
So, and I take your point about once they are on the registrar, but what proof or verification is there before they get onto the registrar to vote in a specific riding?
As I indicated, there is no verification. There is an offense for making a false and misleading statement in the application. And if there is evidence that comes up that the statement made by the applicant was wrong, of course, then there may be consequences. But that regime is designed in recognition of the fact that there may be no such evidence to produce a verification.
Okay, so just so that I'm crystal clear, Elections Canada it takes the prospective elector at their word, subject to there being evidence that, in fact, they are voting in the wrong riding.
Correct, and that is the regime designed by Parliament for the reasons that I indicated.
Now, as you noted, once someone is registered, they remain registered, and as I understand it, what that means is that a special ballot kit will be sent to that address at the time that the writ is issued. Do I have that right?
Correct.
Okay. So what steps are taken to ensure that the special ballot kit actually makes its way into the hands of the prospective elector, given the fact that it could have been several years since they applied to be listed on the registrar at that particular address.
That's a very good question, Mr. Chair. So every 12 to 18 months, we issue a confirmation process. So we write to all people who are on the register to confirm their address. And if they do not reply, we take it then that they have moved and we remove them from the register. So it is regularly verified. So there will not be several years before that occurs. The other thing that is important to know, of course, is that if a kit is issued to a wrong address, for example, because a person no longer resides there. The person, there is a number of elements of information that need to be completed on the outer envelope, which are then matched with the information that we have in the register to make sure that only the right person actually is using the kit.
Two things. First, with regards to the verification that is sent out, you said about every 18 months.
12 to 18.
12 to 18 months, that's an email that is sent?
Correct.
And if you don't hear back, just to clarify what happens?
Then we would remove the elector from the register and they can apply again to register.
And does that happen fairly often?
They have a month to reply, but yes, we do have people who are removed from the register.
Okay. And you then spoke about the special ballot kit. So once an elector fills out their ballot, puts it in the inner envelope, then puts that, has the outer envelope, sends that back to Elections Canada headquarters in Ottawa. You spoke of some verification measures. Can you just elaborate on what those exactly are?
Correct. These are the measures that are in fact prescribed in legislation. So we have to verify that there is a signature on the outer envelope. There's the name of the elector that is there. We do a barcode scan to make sure that the return envelope matches the kit that was issued. So, and that's, of course, is of critical importance. It ensures that a kit that may have been issued in a previous election will never be able to be used in a subsequent election if it was not used in that election, because the barcode ensures that there's a proper match.
Okay. We will move on to Madame Kaibaga for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Bonjour, Monsieur Perrault. Bienvenue dans notre comité.
Welcome, Mr. Perrault, to our committee.
I wanted to ask you a few questions around Bill C-3. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the bill. It is the Lost Canadians bill that has now been passed and received royal assent. So I kind of want to drive that conversations around Canadians that are born of Canadians abroad, may not necessarily have their Canadian citizenship yet, but will be provided one. And maybe if you can give us an idea of how that process is going to go when they become Canadian, if there are Canadians that become Canadians through Bill C-3 and do not live in Canada. Like, what is the plan or the requirements or any legal procedures that they may have to go through? Because the requirement to be able to add it on the register's vote is that you must have lived in Canada for a specific amount of time. So I'm curious to know. I see you're already shaking your head. So let's hear you. Let's hear you on this.
Following the Supreme Court decision in the case of Hang and Duong, the Parliament amended the legislation. And any person who has Canadian citizenship and who lives abroad may register. The Act provides that the place for which they vote, the place for which they register in Canada, is their last place of ordinary residence. However, the Act also states that every person is deemed to have a place of ordinary residence in Canada, that's Section 9, and that if we are unable to determine by the normal rules what is that place of ordinary residence, then the relevant election officer, in this case would be Madame Duquette and her team, would come to a determination of what that place is. And it could be where the family members in Canada or last were. It could be a place of work. Even though they are abroad, they may have worked in Canada. It would be some place of connection. At the end of the day, we are required to find the most appropriate location for that elector. And as I indicated earlier, once that location is identified, the person stays with that location until and if they come to Canada to reside again, not just to visit, but to actually reside in Canada.
Okay, so that kind of covers like a multitude of questions I had for you on that front. I think in the last time I was here and I was asking questions on this specific question was around we were talking about the taxation, like Canadians who pay taxes versus those who don't, whether they have the right to vote or not have the right to vote. I'd like to hear you on that. If there's like any rules around Canadians who pay taxes and those who don't.
The Supreme Court was very clear in the case of Hang and Wong. Every Canadian citizen, wherever they live, wherever they pay taxes, if they pay taxes, all have the same constitutional right to vote, and there is no flexibility there. The ruling was very firm on that.
A couple of questions, I think, from colleagues in the room who are concerned about what is considered a home riding for someone who perhaps has never resided in Canada. Can you expand a little bit on that? Maybe Madame Duquette, if you, the both of you can decide who answers this question. We're just curious to know, for a Canadian who may become a Canadian citizen through Bill C-3, how do they choose what riding, and do they decide what riding they pick, or even if, let's say, they have different sides of the families, a family member may come from Alberta, another one comes from southwestern Ontario, like how do they decide, or who decides where they vote, and how do they make that decision?
I think it will be for the elector to make that decision transparently in conversation with our team. And the choice has to reflect some connection. There, as you indicated in your question, it's a very good example. There may be more than one legitimate place to anchor, if I can use that term, the elector for the purpose of the electoral process. But again, once that is determined, there is no movement that is allowed. So it's a one-time determination.
There's also been discussions around the fact that many ballots were requested in the last election, in the 2025 general election, but not many were returned. Is this something that we want to keep doing if the request is being made, but the return is really low? Maybe there's a lack of interest for Canadians who live abroad in voting in Canada.
So it's a very rich question, Mr. Shea. I don't know that I'll be able to answer all of it in the time allowed. There was double the number of international voters. There was a high interest in this election. However, not being a fixed date election, more than half of those electors applied during the election period. And what we see, if you divide the calendar for the election in 3 blocks, actually the 4 blocks. The first block is right off at the issuance of the writs. Those that are already registered are sent a kit, and there the return rate is very high. Then there's the first third of people who apply, time-wise, the first third, and then return rate is good. But as you progress in the calendar, it dramatically declines. And those who apply in the last segment have, if I'm not mistaken, an 8% return rate.
I have 30 seconds left. I'm going to ask you this question really quickly. Our last witness talked about paying a fee of $124 to return her ballot in a fast manner. Is that fair, given that other Canadians are not paying that kind of fee? Or how can the process be better for them? You have like 20 seconds.
We offer all Canadians the opportunity, if they have access to a consulate or embassy, to return their ballots through that, and Elections Canada pays the delivery service through the embassy. And so there is an expedited process that we
Thank you so much. We are out of time. We are over time. Madame Normandin, s'il vous plaît. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci
6
beaucoup.
minutes, please. Thank you. Thank you for making yourselves available to us. It's much appreciated. I'd like to start with a question about general knowledge, because I don't know how one votes abroad. The kit that's received, is it a blank ballot and you have to write the candidate's name? So in that regard, if candidates aren't known at the beginning of the election, is that a difficulty? Or on the contrary, is that a way of ensuring that electors abroad are keeping track of what's happening in politics here? They have to look at Elections Canada's site to see who their candidate is, take a bit of an interest in the campaign. There are pros and cons. I'd like to hear you on that. I will add to what you've said. There are pros and cons. It's not an easy question. The ballot can take about an average of 12 days, but depending on whether you're in Cincinnati or much further away, it's not the same amount of time. And electors wait 6 days before mailing their ballot. That's data you need to take with a grain of salt. But it's based on studies we've done in the past. Electors who receive a kit at the beginning of the election campaign wait until all the candidates are announced. And so that delays things to a certain point. So that's 21 days. So depending on where they are in the world, it can have an impact on the rate of success of return. But usually it gives enough time. The Act doesn't allow this, but if we were able to put the name of the candidate, it would accelerate the process, or rather the name of the party. But there are other disadvantages in terms of public policy. Thank you very much. I'd like to hear about how potential electors are contacted. I know they have to be on a list. Those who are registered may have already taken a habit in voting. These might be recurring voters. But the others, how are they contacted? Are there initiatives in place? Are there parallel forums, Canadians voting abroad? And is this an area where we should focus more, having more communication with potential electors rather than broadening the way we vote? I think if there's work to be done, it's on communications. It's not easy. This is a diaspora, people all over the world. The main way of communicating is our website. We work with Global Affairs to give them information that Global Affairs share with embassies and consulates. So there is a mechanism there to spread information, but it takes some interest from the elector. We have campaigns on social media, organic content and paid content. There are strategic targets. There are ads to reach those communities. So we'd need to see if we can improve that in one way or another to raise awareness among electors so they know it's possible and that it's important to submit their ballot on time. Something else I'd like to raise. Those who are already registered, do they have the habit of voting? Is that something you see or not necessarily? I would say the rate of participation among those who are already registered is higher than among the general population, those who are already registered abroad. So that is the case. There are a number of reasons. They're registered, so that shows an interest, and then they receive a kit at home. And so that could increase the interest. So I won't get too lost in the explanations, but the data shows that there is a bit more participation. In the different ways of voting from abroad, you've talked about going to a consulate or an embassy. There are some countries that allow proxy voting. Is that something that has been analyzed by you? The possibility of doing that for someone who's very far away who would like to vote, but there's no good postal service, or it would take hours to get to the consulate, but maybe they have family or somebody available who's close by. Has that been analyzed? It has been analyzed. It existed in the law before 1993. We had proxy voting, but it was decided that it was preferable to eliminate it. There's the matter of the secrecy of voting, and then there's trust when the person chooses proxy voting. Those are the two major disadvantages. But then there's the administrative burden of confirming that the person conducting the proxy voting really has the authority to do so. That can take time. We could look at it again, but with administrative steps, it seemed better to have the special ballot than to extend proxy voting internationally. And quickly, on electronic voting, have studies been done on that? Listen, there are all sorts of studies on electronic voting. I'm not a supporter for national elections. I think it's something to explore in other regards. I don't know any G7 countries that use electronic voting. Most countries that have backpedaled in the face of cybersecurity issues. And there's also the matter of trust. It's one thing to have security, but people have to believe in that security and have that confidence. There was a parliamentary committee a few years ago that looked at this, and there was a unanimous view that this is not something we would go forward with for now.
beaucoup.
Thank
Mr.
you very
Van
much.
Thank you to the witnesses for being here, Mr. Perot, again for a second time or third time, perhaps. I have a question about the integrity of the balloting process, and you know where the ballots go, where they end up. But first, I just want to clarify one thing. Following on questions from my colleague, Mr. Cooper, about who receives voting kits abroad. Now, my understanding is that once a person is registered and on the international electors list, whatever it's called, that person is there permanently, subject to every 18 months or so having a confirmation that they're still on. So the ballot kit then goes to all those people who are on that list and who've reaffirmed within the last 18 months. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, good. So thank you. So now when I'm looking at your report, this is just for understanding, on page 21, table 4, you note that electors living outside Canada voting by mail, 101,000 plus some. Let's call that 102,000.
Yep.
And of those, only 57,000 returned, so 56.5%, which is a very low percentage compared to the other forms of voting. So, so just to be clear, the 102,000 ballots issued were not ballots that were just recently requested, but they were sent out automatically to anybody who was on your voters list.
The vast majority of those, or the majority of those, were recently requested during the writ period. There were 48,000 electors on the register at the issue of the writ, 43,000, and those were sent a kit right at the writ drop. The remainder were people who registered during the writ period. And of course, depending on the time, they may have received the kit in a timely way, but in some cases after the election day. See, these sort of late registrations explain the fact that in non-fixed date elections, we have lower return rates.
Right. I'm just surprised by those numbers. 48,000 are on your electors list of
43, I was correct.
43,000, sorry. And how many Canadians live abroad? I understand it might be 3 million.
It's a good question. I've seen estimates between 2 and 4 million. So there's a bit of I've read different estimates.
Right. So that's like a very, very low percentage of people
It is.
are interested enough. Canadians living abroad are interested enough to actually get onto the voters list.
It is a very
understanding?
low percentage.
Yeah.
No matter whether it's 2 or 4 million, it remains low.
So do you see that as a problem, or is that just the natural way of things, that people who live abroad might not be very interested in what's going on in Canada?
That is my perspective, and those who are interested have the right to exercise the right to vote, but they're not compelled to, and not entirely surprised by the fact that there are so few.
I wasn't going to ask this question. My colleague, Ms. Normandin, already asked about electronic voting. Do you think those numbers would improve if we had electronic voting?
And it raises an interesting question. It would make it easier. Whether they would want to vote is another matter. It also raises the question of would Parliament want to make the voting easier for Canadians abroad than for Canadians living in Canada?
Right, good point. Yeah, it's a very good point. Okay, so now I'm going to get to my what I was really going to ask, and that is the security of the ballots once they've been received and mailed back to Ottawa Centre. And, you know, the last time you were here, I asked you a question about the ballots in Port Coquitlam that went missing.
Correct.
So, you know, there's room for human error.
There is.
So what happens with ballots once they arrive at this central place in Ottawa? How secure is it? Is it camera monitored? Who's in charge?
So this is a good question for Madame Duquette, and I'll let her speak to it rather than correct me.
Thank you. So I would say that, of course, the location is very secure. There's restricted access, of course, and the ballots or the outer envelopes are always under lock and key. And before we start the count, of course, there's a verification process that happens with the outer envelopes where we do some integrity checks. First of all, we check if the outer envelope has been signed by the elector. If the there's a barcode on it. If the barcode is associated to the application that we got, or the record that we have on file for the elector, the ED, is it the same ED? Can we match the ED with the ED for the purposes of voting? Once those checks are done, sorted by ED, and then they're sent to the count. But it's a very secure location, and you can't just, it's restricted access for people who deal with the outer envelopes.
Okay, fair enough. So, do you check ID, or to what extent do you check ID to make sure that the person who is on your voters list is actually the person who is casting the ballot, filling it in, or doing a check mark, or whatever they do?
Very quick answer, please.
At the application level,
Okay.
absolutely.
Once it's verified at the application, there's a match with the barcode, then we know it's the same envelope and there's a signature and a name. If members would be interested in visiting the premises at Coventry, I would be very happy to host a visit. It's all under cage and chain.
We do love field trips, but we do have to get House approval, and that's something we can discuss at our next committee business. Thank you, Mr. Van Popta. I arbitrarily am giving everyone an extra minute, including Mr. Van Popta, who had 6 minutes, so it was 6 minutes for Mr. Lewis, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our three witnesses for joining us, for making yourselves available again. You've appeared a number of times as witnesses at our committee. In your report that you sent to us, the report on the 45th general election, you indicated that only 56.5% of special ballots from electors abroad were received in time and counted. I have three specific questions. Do you know how many ballots were received on the day of, but after 6 p.m.? How many were received the day after the vote? And how many ballots were received within about 5 days? We have that data. It would be my pleasure to share it with the committee. It shows that for internationals, it stretches out over about a week. The curve goes down. But for national electors, those who are voting outside their riding but are sending it through the mail to the central administration, it's about 3 or 4 days we receive them. So there's a difference between the two, and we have that data. Okay, thank you for sending us that data. There are witnesses who've told us or suggested that there should be more time for special ballots to arrive from other countries. That would push back the results of the election. What do you think of that suggestion? It would delay. There are a number of countries that do it. BC does it here. In tight elections, it can raise tension. There could be conspiracy theories. So it's not something I've recommended in the past. I recommended giving a week at the beginning with fixed date elections. There's less of an issue with fixed date elections because electors can plan their vote more. But if there's no fixed date, if we have to add time, I would do it at the beginning, not at the end. You've said the fact that we didn't have a fixed date election, it was brought up regularly, and the reliability of our postal system. There are witnesses from other countries who said that there are a number of ways to vote. A few were mentioned earlier: proxy voting, electronic voting, and I would say a hybrid format where a person can receive the ballot by email, print it at home, fill it out, and send it by mail. I worked a lot with people who were no longer able to take care of their affairs. I wonder, suppose I lived in France with my mother who doesn't have all of her faculties. I ask for the ballot for her. I write the name I want and I send it back. how do we make sure that there's someone abroad, well, that the person still has all of their faculties to vote? So so all people have the right to vote. They have to show that desire. With special ballots, they have to sign. There's a mark there that they took an action. Signatures can be forged. We looked at a hybrid system. In 2018, we looked at it. It's possible to do that. It's technically possible. We would need to change our systems to do it, but it would be possible. There are challenges. For an elector to not have to buy 3 different size envelopes, which is pretty difficult to put them in, we've developed a model where you fold. There's some complexity for the elector, and the elector would have to have a printer. Fewer and fewer people have printers at home. So at the time when we looked at it, when we looked at the number of electors abroad, which was lower than now, and the complexity, it didn't seem a promising avenue. If we want to explore other mechanisms, if we want to go further, there's voting over the phone, or there's a more modern form, which is by teleconference, where you see the person who shows their ID and then goes to a virtual room to vote anonymously. That wouldn't be allowed currently under the Act. But that would seem more rooted in the future than folding external envelopes and mailing them. You'll say that maybe I'm watching too much TV, but with fake news and holograms, maybe we'd see fictional people appear. Inaudible comment. Somebody mentioned in regard to obtaining all of the information on an election that's happening in the country, that it can be difficult to find all of that, and suggested the creation of one website where all of the information would be put together. Listen, all of the information is on a tab of our website. So that's just a variation. People who want to vote nowadays, who can access a website, which is relatively well made, I think the information is there on our website.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Normandin, 3.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. On a
Thank you very
parlé
much. We've talked a lot about the participation rate, which is about 0.9% for electors abroad. We could wonder if it was about 1%, but if it was really small, the ballots that come back, it's about 57% of ballots that get back. So that's under 2% of the diaspora that participates in elections. So I'd like to hear your perspective, because it seems to be said that it's bad that the rate is so low. That's what colleagues have said. But maybe it's a matter of interest. What would your perspective be? Is it always a bad thing for the participation rate to be so low? Listen, this is a philosophical question more than a technical one. Maybe it's not my main role. I think the answer is a little bit in your question. It has to do with the interest of electors. There are electors abroad who are interested, who want to participate. I think our work is to facilitate that and to ensure the integrity of their participation. That's our mandate. But people who've left the country, perhaps decades ago, that's not up to Elections Canada. Maybe political parties want to engage them. Maybe there are other groups who want to engage them, but I don't think it's the mandate of Elections Canada to engage people who left the country many years ago. Thank you very much. You mentioned that the estimate made of the diaspora is between 2 and 4 million people. That's quite a broad range. Is that not symptomatic of poor knowledge by different Canadian institutions of the population abroad? Could we better communicate to people abroad that they're able to vote, better collaboration with departments, for example. When a Canadian files their taxes from abroad, information could be sent at the same time on how to register for the list of electors, rather than putting that only on the shoulders of Elections Canada. I'm open to all suggestions. That could be a good one. I don't know how many people who reside abroad pay taxes in Canada. There may be a few, but to vote based on the international register, you have to really reside abroad. We have Canadians who go abroad, like snowbirds. Those people are considered national electors. They vote by special ballot, but they're not in the same category. It's not the same mechanism that is used. In the same vein, on communication, on elections, the content of an election campaign, is this something that should fall under the Office of the Chief Electoral Officer, or should it go through someone else to ensure, for example, the impression of neutrality and impartiality? Because maybe we're combining the two things a little bit during this study. You've talked about facilitating voting. That's your essential role. Maybe we should stick to that in what we ask of you. Yes, I think basically on our website we have information on who the candidates are, who are the registered parties, and then it's very easy for an elector to go look at the websites of the political parties. I wouldn't want to put partisan content on the website of Elections Canada. I think there's a line we need to hold there to preserve confidence in the impartiality of Elections Canada. Thank you.
To Mr. Jackson, please, for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair, and I may split my time if my colleague has some questions as well. So I'm going to be very quick and efficient with this. Gentlemen, nice to see you again. Madam Duquette, nice to meet you. I voted by special ballot for myself, which was a strange phenomenon. And I'm just wondering if you can tell me what protocols are in place to ensure the security of special ballots at Elections Canada offices in each constituency. Are they stored at each returning office in a camera-monitored storage area?
Yes, I can take that. So all returning officers who secure an office, who rent out an office for the purposes of the general election, need to have a security system, and all ballots must be under lock and key. So they have filing cabinets or things like
Sure.
that.
Does a security system include cameras or just an alarm system?
We can check on that, but it really depends on the type of setup because, as you probably know, all offices are not created equal. It's not
Sure.
Tim Hortons model, so it really depends on the landlord and what's available at the location.
And who would have access to the storage area? Just the returning officer, or would other officials at each returning office have access as well?
I would say that in terms of the ballots and the special ballots, it's probably what we call or what we refer to as this service point supervisor. This is a role that oversees what we call the service center, where you have service agents who facilitate voting by special ballot.
Okay.
Ultimately, he's responsible to oversee the planning and the deployment of all services that leverage special ballot.
And my final question is, at some point in the process for other ballot boxes, they go home to a private residence to be secured, is my understanding. Does that ever happen with special ballot boxes? They never leave returning offices?
No.
Unless they are national ballots, then they need to be shipped to headquarters ahead of day zero.
But those would never go to a private residence?
They would not.
Okay.
They would not.
Thank you. I would yield the rest of my time to Mr. Calkins.
Thank you very much. The last federal election, according to, I think it was $570 million. Do I have that about right? And if you factor that out over 37 days, that's $15.5 million a day. Now, granted, some days in the election are more expensive than others for Elections Canada to prosecute the election. Does it make sense from a fiscal capacity to extend the length of the election period to let a few hundred or maybe a few thousand more electors participate overseas? And what's the cost-benefit analysis on that if you've done one?
You can easily provide the numbers because we've had longer election periods. We had one in 2015, for example, which was 79 days. The costs are largely identical. The difference could be in an additional month of rent, depending on the date, the timing for the RO offices. But there would be 1 week additional salary for the limited staff in the office of a returning officer, but it would not significantly impact.
What percentage of the staff are actually get paid for the entire duration of an election, and which, like compared to the number of staff that are brought on just for E-Day and for advanced polling days, et cetera?
I'll guess a number, and my friend here will correct me, but we're talking about for 1-day workers or a few-day workers. Advanced polls and polling day, we're probably around 200,000, and for office staff around 30,000, but it's probably an overstatement on my part.
That gives me the ratios that I need. Out of the 43,000 people that are on the list at the start of the last election for the overseas, how do they show up on the voters list?
They show up on the international register.
So they don't show up but they're registered in an electoral district, are they not?
My friend will correct me. They do not show up on the list.
They do not show up on the list that is used during that election. They are on the permanent voters list, but they are not released on the list that we provide to returning officers, to candidates and political parties.
Why not?
Because they are registered to vote by special ballot, and they are not expected to vote at their polling location.
And that list is available through the portal to candidates and parties, so it's not a secret list somewhere. But the list that is used to administer the in-person voting does not include international.
Fair enough. Last question I have, Madame Duquette, you were talking about the things that you check when a ballot is returned, and I was talking specifically, it doesn't really matter where, but the integrity of the process is what matters to me. So we've got the barcode, you do the check at the time of the application, which is how you do we have no idea if the person that's actually filled in the ballot was the actual person. I understand that would be difficult to administer, but when that ballot is returned, is it checked also for integrity of the envelope?
Oh, absolutely, because we use a standard set of envelopes, and it's got particular markings on it. It has a specific color on it.
If an envelope looks like it's been opened or tampered with, what do you do?
We set it aside.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Lewis, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be splitting my time with Madame O'Rourke. Thank you, Ms. Duquette, Mr. Perot, Monsieur Roussel, for this important study. We're studying about the challenges that Canadians living abroad face in exercising their democratic right to vote, and we're looking at the operational and logistic barriers behind these. And I appreciate your advice and your practical solutions. We're talking about ballot delivery times, modernization in any way of special voting, and I appreciate your expertise. I believe you, Monsieur Perot, said roughly half of the people that sent in ballots were already on the list, and then when a writ drops, the writ is given, then the other half applied for. Is that correct? Roughly?
It was less than half who were already on the register. The majority were not. And this is somewhat, I would say, exceptional. There typically are fewer people who register during the writ period. And so it explains perhaps the large number of either unreturned because they received it so late that they didn't dare return it, or late return. The fact that it was not a fixed date election, the fact that it was a high turnout election, so people were interested in participating, resulted presumably in that late demand for international ballots.
I mean, the biggest challenge is, like you said, not a fixed election date. So kudos to you and everyone who has to work with that. When people ask for a ballot, they're sent a ballot. Do you end up getting? So I know there's a website, but do you end up getting an increase in inquiries as to people saying, I'm trying to fill this out, can I have some help? Is there a bit of a tech support?
Absolutely. For my directorate, for example, we have what we call a service center, which is a support center where electors can contact us and they can ask us a variety of questions related to special ballot voting. It could be something about their particular kit, like I registered on such and such a date, I didn't get a kit yet, or, all kinds of information. But last event, we would have received well over 10,000 inquiries just by phone.
Right. And those inquiries, I'm assuming, become a bit of a study after the election to see what kind of improvements can be made?
We look if there's complaints, if there's trends, if there's areas that we can focus on for future improvements. So we take that in consideration.
Is it too early to ask from this election? Yes. Okay. I do appreciate that. I'll cede my time to Madame O'Rourke.
Thank you so much. So I'm twice I was a trainer for Elections Canada in my riding. I'm very familiar with municipal voting, and I was a trainer for Elections Ontario as well. So I really appreciate the challenge of having to gather the people, train them right, because the people being trained are in those offices as well. It's like assembling a corporation in immediately as soon as the writ drops, and then seeing it through. So kudos to you and your team. I'm curious with respect to the international voting, is there any riding, so you see the distribution of who's registering as well, is there any riding where there's potential for a material difference in the outcome if everybody voted that you think it could potentially influence an election? So that's a question. Also, do you see any trends around which countries have the most registered electors outside of Canada? And then did the redécoupage have any kind of impact on the foreign voters this year?
We do look at the patterns. We do want to see after an election whether there are indicia of some anomaly, of unexpectedly high number of internationals showing up in one particular part of the country that does not seem plausible. And we haven't seen any kind of trend that's worrisome. Of course, they are sprinkled across the country. If the result is close enough, by definition, it can make a difference, and I guess that's the whole point of it, is to be able to make that difference. But we don't see any unexpected distribution.
And just to come back on the closeness sometimes, would it be helpful to count the votes that are postmarked for the appropriate date and time? And are there ever circumstances where flights are canceled or there's a massive storm and the ballots just can't get back in time? Are there considerations for that, given that every vote matters?
Yes, that's an important point. Now, the regime has been designed with that in mind, with a certain strictness, that it has to be in no matter what. And if you start doing exceptions for one, because it's a few hours, why not a few days? A storm, what about a flood? A strike. And so you have to be strict. We have to administer the rules as they are laid out. And we do see kits coming in, and of course there are some kits that are lost in the mail, come in later, or delayed for all kinds of reasons. But there has to be strictness. I am told that Canada Post, and it may be mistaken, but I was informed that Canada Post has stopped date marking the envelopes that they process. And so that this would not be a reliable marker. But in any event, I think it raises all kinds of policy questions that are legitimate, and we see countries that do allow votes to be counted if they come in after the election. But then you want to make sure that the system that they use for delivery marks the time the vote was cast. And there's a variety of means by which mail returns to us at the international and national level. Somebody can bring it in. Somebody can send it by by courier or by regular mail. So we'd have to look at all the circumstances to make sure that there's a clear marker for the date. I don't know that Canada Post still does that.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our witnesses. We're going to suspend for a little bit. We have a witness that is stuck at security, though they are in the building, so our short break may be a couple minutes longer than usual, but we are suspended. From the Canadian Armed Forces, we have Captain James Salt, who's the Coordinating Officer, Special Voting Rules at National Defense. And from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Kati Chaba, who's the Director General, Consul Affairs Bureau. Ms. Chaba, I believe, is going first. 5 minutes, please.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Hello, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I am pleased to share an overview of how, at Global Affairs, we support Canadians voting from abroad during federal elections. Let me start by clarifying our role. Global Affairs Canada has a very specific and limited mandate when it comes to overseas voting. Our responsibilities are outlined in a cooperation agreement with Elections Canada, first signed in 1993 and updated in 2019.
This agreement, Elections Canada is fully responsible for determining who is eligible to vote and for registering electors on the International Register of Electors. Our role is simply to provide logistical support through Canada's network of diplomatic missions abroad. It is also important to note what we do not do. We don't support provincial elections, and we don't assist foreign governments in organizing voting in Canada for their own citizens. So what does our support look like in practice? In the lead up to an election, our missions assist Canadians living abroad by answering general questions by phone or email about how to vote using a special mail-in ballot. For more complex inquiries, we refer them directly to Elections Canada. Missions post information on their websites and share updates through social media channels to ensure Canadians abroad have timely and accurate information. Before Canadians can vote from abroad, they must submit an application to be included in the International Register of Electors. This process is typically done online. However, missions can assist electors who require accommodation by sending the application on their behalf to Elections Canada by fax or email. We also assist electors who choose to use a mission as their mailing address for receiving their ballots. When the mission receives the ballot, they contact the client, and that's assuming the client has provided their contact details to the mission, informing them that their ballot has arrived and to return the completed ballot by a specific date. Regardless of whether a Canadian received their ballot directly or through the mission, they have the option of bringing the completed ballots to the mission by a specific date for onward delivery to Elections Canada. Typically, ballots are sent through regular shipments via DHL.
But again, to be clear, we do not determine eligibility, process applications, provide voting kits, or organize in-person voting. Now let me share a snapshot from the 45th general election in April 2025. Approximately 102,000 special ballots were issued upon request to Canadians living outside the country. Of these, just over 57,000 ballots, 56.5%, were returned on time and counted, an improvement from the previous election return rate of 48.5%.
Of the remaining 43.5% of special ballots that were sent out by Elections Canada, 19% of those ballots were returned late and had to be set aside. Late returns were mainly due to a number of factors, including international postal challenges, and in some cases, electors not receiving their ballot in time or not delivering their completed ballots to missions early enough for onward shipment to Elections Canada before the deadline. In total, 164 Canadian diplomatic offices submitted ballots on behalf of electors. Although we've seen some progress in return rates, challenges remain. Some Canadians abroad expect to vote in person at missions, which is not possible. Sometimes Canadian voters request that ballots be sent to missions, but fail to notify staff or to provide contact details, complicating pickup of the ballots. And of course, resource constraints at missions can be an issue during peak periods. In closing, we continue to work closely with our partners at Elections Canada to address these issues, whether it's improving communications with Canadians abroad, streamlining logistics, or finding ways to mitigate delays in international mail. Together, we're committed to making the process as clear and accessible as possible for Canadians voting outside the country. Thanks for your attention. I will be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you so much. Captain Salt, please, 5 minutes.
Good day, and thank you very much for the opportunity to appear today. As you mentioned, one of my official duties within the Canadian Armed Forces is the coordinating officer for special voting rules for the national defense. The role was assigned to me in 2023 by our minister via a designation order per the Canada Elections Act, and then again formalized in 2025 by our current minister. My main role is to maintain the CAF's ability and readiness to administer military polling stations during federal general elections. As the committee is aware, in accordance with the CEA, qualified CAF electors, whether in Canada or abroad, are allowed to vote at military polling stations via special ballot, and this special operating procedures have been in place since the early 20th century. I, along with a team of designated liaison officers, assist our military commanding officers in discharge of this duty, and I work with the Chief Electoral Officer through the special voting rules administrator and the military vote coordinator in the administration of this. Our liaison officers and their alternates, who are also formally assigned by our minister, are then assigned specific regional responsibilities over 10 regions. These regions cover all the provinces and territories, with specific ones dedicated to the NCR, OutCan or outside of Canada, and deployed operations. Our members are permitted to cast their vote in a number of ways. They may choose to vote in the same manner as all Canadian citizens do, such as at a polling station on election day or through an advance poll. Or they may choose to vote via the special ballot. The only caveat to this is those that are not of legal age within the CAF and those that hold permanent residence, and I can further expand on how we manage this if desired. The concept and process and how we do this isn't overly complicated, although implementation of it can be a little tricky, as you can well imagine. Prior to an election being announced, initial training of our liaison officers is provided by officials from Elections Canada, and the teams coordinate with the unit commanding officers and their assigned unit elections officer, who are basically the boots on the ground to help implement voting activity. Once a writ's been issued, the liaison officers begin preparations in their assigned regions. A list of eligible CAF electors is compiled via our personnel database called Guardian, and Elections Canada begins distributing voting material to the liaison officers. Polling materials typically received by units 1 week prior to our planned military polling period. So a little bit about Guardian. This is a real-time database that provides our polling stations and Elections Canada with our members' designated voting district. Residency is drawn from their home address in the system, and for those that are posted outside of Canada, it's the last Canadian address that we have on record for them. Our polling stations could be in Canada at a unit overseas or could be mobile in nature. For small missions or where our OutCan footprint is very small, such as 3 to 5 members, for example, the designated liaison officer coordinates directly with the members, and they use the standard Elections Canada mail-in voting option similar to other Canadians abroad. CAF typically operates on a 36-day election calendar once a writ's been issued. Within that 36-day period, commanding officers are mandated to provide their members with a 6-day polling window, typically the week prior to the national polling day. And during that window, polling stations need to be open for a minimum of 3 days and at least 3 hours on those days. CAF polling stations aren't all that dissimilar to the civilian ones. A member arrives, their eligibility is verified, ballots are cast. Those ballots are properly sealed and secured in accordance with Elections Canada protocols. And then completed ballots are returned that evening, or when that's not possible, for a ship at sea, for example, they're returned no later than 6 p.m. on the national polling day. Any adaptations to this process needs to be pre-approved by Elections Canada. While some CAF polling stations resemble a more typical civilian station, they've also been set up in the field during exercises out of country, as I mentioned, on ships at sea. And during the last election, we even saw Canadians casting their vote from the back of a pickup truck at our station in Alert while the aircraft sat on the tarmac waiting to depart before bad weather rolled in. In that instance, this also allowed non-CAF members from Environmental and Climate Change Canada in Alert and at the Eureka station, so about 50 people in total, to vote. Single ballot kits were also provided to our special operations members outside of Canada. And for our troops in Latvia, the voting period was extended due to operational requirements to ensure all members had the opportunity to vote. Of the nearly 104,000 eligible CAF electors, over 52,000 of them took advantage of civilian polling options, and close to 25,000 of our members cast a special ballot at the last election. All told, over 76,000 or 73.5% of our members voted this year, and nearly a quarter of those used one of the 230 polling stations that were set up across the world, including the mobile one mentioned earlier in the rear cab of a pickup in the far north. I thank you again for this opportunity and welcome any questions that the committee might have regarding special voting rules as it pertains to the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll start with Mr. Ruff. Welcome back. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the people testifying or appearing today, especially you, Captain Salt. I want to thank you for your service, and I'm not sure, concerning your trade, that this job is the same as being out at sea. I had a great conversation with Vice Admiral Topshee there on the weekend down in Halifax, and again, the Navy's in great hands. So, look, things have changed, obviously, a little bit in the last 6 years. When I was in, I could vote, as you've quite laid out, but I've never voted in any riding federally since I was eligible to vote, other than the riding of Bruce Grey Owen Sound that I have the privilege to represent now, because I was always able to, it never changed in my 25-plus year career in the military. Things have changed. Could you explain, or if you're aware, how current CAF members, my understanding, they could always vote from their home riding where they originate if they never change that, or they have to vote from their latest residence here in Canada for where their ballot gets cast. Has that changed, or could you explain that, please?
Thank you very much for your question, sir. Yes, it has changed a little bit. As the Vice Chair is aware, previously members would fill out what was called a Statement of Ordinary Residence, and this was captured within our systems, and that data was provided to Elections Canada. So a member could indicate, for myself as an example, that I would like to vote in the Ottawa district, or because I spent the majority of my time in Victoria in the Navy, that might be where I wanted to vote. I believe it was about 10 years ago, there was a bill that was passed that removed the requirement for a Statement of Ordinary Residence. We use, as I mentioned, Guardian now, so it's their current residence where they are in the system. I believe, and I would have to verify with Elections Canada, but as I understand it, all CAF members, just like any Canadian, is still permitted to register through Elections Canada and choose their voting district that they wish to, and then that would be recorded in our system. And then when the CAF elector lists are put out, the individuals would vote based on that information, sir.
I appreciate that, and Chair, I think the committee, I'm fascinated to get a little bit more in on this details to see how it has changed, and obviously if it was 10 years ago, I wasn't in a position to analyze this closely here as a parliamentarian, but it's something that I just want to make sure. I believe our CAF members should be able to vote from and stay voting from wherever they sort of enrolled from. I want to get into the challenges that we face, and I know GAC's incredibly supportive, especially with some of the smaller missions that we have deployed around the world to get those ballots back. But when timing is of the essence, that 35, 36-day window, can you explain a little bit? Again, I'll stay focused on you, Captain Salt, although, how do I pronounce your last name? Shaba. If there's something you want to add, is with respect to candidate lists and how they get because special ballots, for those of us that want to vote at the start of a RIP period, you got to know how to spell the last name or the name of the candidate. A little bit more complicated when we got distances of sometimes tens of thousands of kilometers. So how does that work? Are you providing that list of candidates, or is it on the individual Canadians abroad to basically know who they're voting for? And if you can explain some of the challenges for the smaller missions and getting the ballots back.
So, sir, in answer to your first question, thank you very much for that. The CAF electoral, or the electoral list, is provided to us from Elections Canada once it's been finalized. And that list, whether the individuals are voting at, say, our National Defence Headquarters here in Ottawa, or through a single ballot because they're deployed in Lebanon, the lists are provided to them at that time. So they have full access to the individuals within their particular riding that they would be able to vote for. With regards to logistics, we're in a very unique position, as you're well aware. We have available to us a lot of resources that we can put to bear if there's a requirement for it. Typically, we do make use, just like Global Affairs does, make use of couriers like DHL to get our votes back whenever possible, specifically those that are in Canada, for example, an individual voting in Victoria, and getting those votes back to Elections Canada headquarters here in Ottawa. But of course, we also have, the ability to move votes as if required, and the alert example was a perfect case. This was not a flight that was set up specific for the voting period. It was coincidental that they were going up there for a supply run, and in fact, the flight had been canceled twice prior to that due to bad weather during the elections period, and this was our last opportunity to get up there, and thus the reason why I said it was sitting on the tarmac waiting for poor weather to roll in, so it could get off the ground and head back to Ottawa with those ballots. Similarly, for overseas, we have utilized, or we do have the ability to utilize if we need to, through collaboration with Global Affairs, the embassies overseas to help move our votes. And so there's a lot of collaboration in that sense, sir.
30 seconds. Look, is there any special conditions with Elections Canada? Because obviously, if the ballots have been sort of transferred either to GAC or in the CAF's leadership's hand and sealed, or is the timelines very strict on they need to be back in Elections Canada's hands by sort of voting night?
In our case, they have to be back no later than 6 p.m. I'm proud to say we had every single CAF ballot out of those 25,000 that I spoke to made it back to Elections Canada on time this year.
Thank you so much. Madame Kaibagas, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'd like to welcome our distinguished guest today. Very nice to see you again, Mrs. Chaba. I had the opportunity of meeting Ms. Chaba in Ghana when she was the High Commissioner for Ghana. So it's very nice to see you, and welcome Mr. Salt as well. You did mention a list of things that you guys are not able to provide for Canadians who are living abroad. Can you mention ones that you can do? And as I was listening to the questioning of colleagues the opposite group, I'm very intrigued to hear how some of the resources the CAF is using could be also extended to smaller missions that may not have the services needed to be able to bring the ballots in time.
Yes, happy to respond to that, Mr. Chair. So there are a number of things that Global Affairs, through its missions, can provide both to electors and to Elections Canada. First of all, we start by providing an up-to-date list of all of Canada's diplomatic missions and consular posts, so that Elections Canada knows where we are working from. We respond directly to general inquiries from Canadian electors abroad on the process of voting through special ballot, but we will only respond to those to general information. Any specific cases will be referred to Elections Canada. We post information on our embassy website, and we share updates through social media to ensure that Canadians abroad have timely and accurate information. Whether they see it or not is another question, but we do our best to get that information out into the public. We can assist electors who need special help, who need accommodations, to actually submit their application to Elections Canada to get onto the International Register of Electors. We then can serve as a post office, in a sense, for people who wish to have their ballots sent to the mission abroad, or for Canadians to drop off their completed ballots, and we will send them back to Canada on their behalf. And then we also do our very best to get them back to Canada in time for Election Day. We use normally courier services that are paid for by Elections Canada.
Thank you for clarifying all the things that you offer as an option. I'll ask you a few more questions, but I do want to ask Mr. Salt, do the measures... First of all, I want to say how impressed I am by the numbers of members who are voting, which is very good. That's a really high number. Is this extended to families of CAF members?
Thank you for your question. So The special ballot vote is extended to family members who are deployed overseas in an OUTCAN situation, but not within those within Canada. So we actually had approximately 175 civilian votes that were transported with military votes, separate, but transported with them and delivered to Elections Canada. So a spouse or a sibling who is of legal age that is on an OUTCAN deployment with their father or mother would be allowed to vote, and we would transport those votes to Elections Canada alongside ours.
And in your numbers, is there also, do you include some of the CAF members who are stationed at different embassies for different reasons? Or is it just specifically deployments that are in groups?
No, so we have three. In this particular case, we will have a liaison officer that is assigned to OUTCAN, out of Canada, and assigned to Rest of World. Rest of World are those individuals that are deployed. OUTCAN, or outside of Canada, are those that are posted overseas. For example, they might be at Global Affairs, they might be posted to NATO headquarters in Brussels, etc. So that is how they're divided up, and that list is provided to Elections Canada, and then Elections Canada ensures that those votes, the special ballots, are transported to the individuals using the liaison officers as required to help facilitate that.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Chaba, if you can comment on whether in situations where you can, if there could be a collaboration of resources, because it sounds like, if there are CAF members who are at our Global Affair Canada, which I've met some, are able to vote through the CAF, would this effort allow more ballots to return back to Canada? Because you did mention about the ballots that, let's say for this general election, did not make it back because of the timing issue. Could you comment on whether these votes could be able to return in that manner?
So certainly, we do have excellent collaboration between Global Affairs Canada and of course Elections Canada, but also with the armed forces. In the instance that the example that was given, someone who is deployed to a mission abroad, for example, as the defense attaché, they would be welcome to include their ballot and their family's ballots in the courier bag that is then coming back to headquarters in time. Where we have missions, I think we are pleased to collaborate in whatever ways make it fastest and easiest to get ballots back. But of course, there will be situations where CAF may have a presence on the ground where we don't actually have a diplomatic mission. So then, in those cases, it's of course more logical for them to manage.
With less than 10 seconds left, I did really want to know about the general. Once the names go on they're certified by Elections Canada, because it takes a little bit of time to make it to the website, and what is that procedure and tracking time if there are some special allocations for people who are abroad to be able to cast their votes after the period?
Well, I'm going to have to be a bit of a jerk. With 10 seconds left, that was a 30-second question. So we will come back to that. We will have lots of time. You are over. We will go to Mr. Kalk, sorry, Madame Normandin, je m'excuse. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
I apologize. 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much. Thank you to both of our witnesses for joining us. It's very much appreciated. Captain Salt, I'll give you a moment. My first question will be for you. Thank you very much. Captain Salt, I'd like to hear your perspective on the complex aspect of organizing voting offices. Are you hearing the interpretation? Are you hearing the interpretation? This is the English channel. English channel. 1, 2, 3. English channel. English channel. 1, 2, 3. Testing. Great. Now you can hear me well? Excellent. Thank you very much. Great. Thank you very much. I'd like to hear your perspective on the level of complexity when it comes to organizing voting offices for missions abroad, especially with rotations that could happen in the middle of an election. I know that the armed forces are very good at logistics. That's why you're so precious, but that must be a big challenge. I'd like to hear your perspective on how you have voting offices when there's a rotation. I'm thinking of the Operation Reassurance, where a lot of Canadians are deployed and there are rotations every 6 months. What happens if that happens during an election?
Thank you for your question to the chair. Je vais répondre en anglais si
I will
c'est pas-
answer in English if that's possible, just because of the topic.
In the cases of individuals that are deployed, thankfully we know generally well in advance when they're going to be deployed, and so we have an opportunity to do some advance collaboration with Elections Canada to ensure that those individuals that are going to be on the ground during a designated polling window, if they have not been able to take advantage of civilian election opportunities, that they're counted towards that. There have been, or there would be no doubt, the occasional situation where an individual might get deployed on very short notice. In those situations, we have the ability, because of the daily interactions with our Elections Canada representatives, to be able to, on very short notice, pull together a special ballot, make sure that the individual has that ballot and is able to vote prior to deploying or even while deployed. We have processes in place, and as I mentioned, thankfully we haven't, that I am aware of, we've not run into an opportunity where an individual wanted to vote and were unable to.
Merci beaucoup. Et Madame Chaba, peut-être pour des questions pour vous.
Thank you very much. Ms. Chaba, questions for you as well. At the beginning of your opening statement, you explained your role, the agreement you have with Elections Canada. I'd be curious to hear your view, because it seems to be foundational for voting abroad. The issue of communicating information to electors abroad so they register on this list. I know you can publish information online, but contrary to national electors who receive their voting card, there's no personalized communication, to my knowledge, with potential electors. Is this something that could be part of your mandate one day if there was a review of your agreement with Election Canada? If so, would it be complicated? Would you be the best suited? Do you know where Canadians are abroad geographically? It doesn't seem very clear what the size of the diaspora is. It's a very broad question. If you could give me a bit of an overview. Yes, Mr. Chair. This question has a number of aspects. We are not able now to communicate directly with Canadians abroad, in part because we don't know who are the Canadians who live abroad. There are a certain number who register with Global Affairs Canada, but there are many Canadians who live abroad who have no contact with us, and we don't know where they are. So it would be very difficult to communicate directly with them. What I can say is that the communication we offer on the embassy's website or through social media, this is communication written in a way to encourage Canadians to vote, to register for the list. So we do everything we can with the resources we have to communicate the fact that there's an election coming up and what the procedures are to register. To your knowledge, is there a department that would be able to have a little bit more information? I don't know, Citizenship Canada emitting passports, or Canada Revenue for those who are filing taxes? Is there a place where that information is more accessible for Canadians abroad? I do not think there is one department that would have all of that information. Global Affairs Canada has a list of people who register as persons traveling or living in another country. There are Canadians who pay their taxes, but it's not necessarily the same people. Passports as well. Canadians can apply for a passport not necessarily because they live abroad, but because they're traveling and something happens with their passport. So there's not one way to find out where Canadians are living abroad. I'll keep my 30 seconds for the next turn.
Okay. Mr. Culkins, 5 minutes, please.
I appreciate that we can bank our time now, Mr. Chair. And
The amount of time that we have, the number figure, we have some time.
Okay, I just have a few questions. I may have some time left over, which case I think one of my colleagues will step in, Mr. Chair. Captain Salt, thank you very much for being here. I'll start with a line of question for you. I see that you're in our in the Navy on that side of the equation. So I guess I'll ask this question: I don't know of any airplanes that can stay airborne for 37 days, and I don't know anybody on the ground who can't get to a polling station, but there are sailors that are at sea for more than 37 days. Explain to me how a sailor who is at sea can vote in a general election and how that process works.
Thank you very much for the question, Chair. So as the committee member rightly points out, ships can and often are at sea for long periods. In the cases where we have ships at sea that might be transiting long distances, etc., we do have the ability through to try to, or the ability to get ballots out to the ships in advance prior to, when they're within range of certain areas. So although a ship might be at sea for 35 days, they wouldn't necessarily be so far away from the nearest port where we might be able to put a helicopter ashore and arrange for a pickup of ballots and bring it back. Or even potentially utilizing other military navies, navies to help transport. Now, I know of no situation where we've done that before, but the potential is there. Ships, even though they're at sea for 35 days and can stay at sea for longer than 35 days, have the ability to get within transportation distance to be able to transport ballots as need be.
Are you satisfied, Captain, that every CAF member who's on deployment that wants to vote is able to vote?
What I can tell you, sir, is that every CAF member that was deployed or was not available to vote and wished to was provided the opportunity. We had approximately 3,200 ballots that were shipped overseas. So these are special ballots outside of the Canadian AOR that were shipped to our CAF members, either deployed on ships, on exercises, special missions at embassies, etc. And so that was the total number that Elections Canada managed to get out and have returned prior to 6 p.m. on Elections Day.
And sir, are you satisfied that every ballot that's cast by a member that's deployed, that ballot gets back to Elections Canada in a timely fashion, gets counted, and that there is scrutiny and oversight and security of those ballots as it's being transferred from the voting facility back to Elections Canada?
Thank you for your follow-on question, Chair. I can only speak to what I have seen personally within the process. As you can imagine, the Canadian Armed Forces, we're all about procedures. And so everything it has a way of doing things. And, while we may transport completed ballots through couriers in the same manner that Global Affairs does or other government departments, our internal process ensures that our liaison officers and the unit elections officers are fully trained to take those ballots, make sure that they're sealed properly, make sure that they do get back on time, as I mentioned this year. Out of the 25,000 ballots that were sent out, every single ballot was received. Now, we did have, I believe, I can count on one hand, 4 spoiled ballots, and that was due to improper procedures conducted by the unit elections officer on site. So there were 4 CAF members who cast a vote, but it did not count because it was considered a spoil ballot. And those procedures were reviewed, and we will tighten things up as need be to make sure that our liaison officers and elections officers ensure that those types of small errors don't happen.
Can a Canadian Forces member, a CAF member, vote in the riding that they were born and raised in for the duration of their career?
Again, thank you for the follow-up question. As mentioned to the Vice Chair, I will need to verify exactly with Elections Canada on this one. As far as I'm aware, all CAF members, just like any Canadian, is permitted to register in whatever riding they wish, and then that information would then be placed in our system. But I would need to follow up with Elections Canada just to verify that for the
And
member.
Elections Canada would then be the arbiter of whether or not they're allowed to register in that riding. Is that what you're saying, sir?
As I understand the process, that is correct, sir, yes.
Okay. Ms. Chaba, are all of our diplomats who are deployed and serving around the world, are you satisfied that they're all able to vote in a secure and safe way and that their ballots are returned in time to be counted?
I am, yes. As someone who has served for 18 years at missions abroad, I can tell you that there is a robust process for ensuring that Canadian diplomats going out on posting are informed of the process for registering with the International Register of Electors. The onus is on the individual, of course, to choose to register, but we do have the then rigorous processes in place to ensure that we are collecting the ballots in a safe way and then returning them to Canada in time for Election Day.
You said in your opening remarks that you help Canadians living abroad make sure that they have the information, and you work in basically a liaise capacity, educational capacity, and where situations are more difficult or complex, you hand them over directly to Elections Canada. Could you give this committee any insights that you have on any of the frustrations? I know it might be anecdotal. I don't know how you capture this information or if you do, but we seem to have a very low interest from Canadians living abroad in participating in the election. Can you give us any examples or any anecdotal evidence to suggest that Canadians are by and large not voting because of their frustration with the process? Or what would you say is the complaints, if you were getting complaints from Canadians living abroad, what do they complain about in the administration of elections?
Let me interrupt you there. That was an outstanding question, but we are well over time. I was going to add a minute at the end to each member, but I'll give another minute to Madame Briere for 6 minutes, and then I will give another minute in addition to her 30 seconds to Madame Normandin, and then we'll do 5 minutes, 5 minutes. So the bank works, I guess. Madame Briere, s'il vous plaît, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I
6
will
minutes.
with my colleague Dominic. Thank you to both of you for being here. Captain Salt, you said that during your opening remarks that you could expand on the PR, people with PR, permanent residents, and under 18 years old, I think.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you to the chair for the question. So, as mentioned, all CAF electors, all eligible CAF electors, are permitted to vote. But as the committee may or may not be aware, we can enroll individuals within the Canadian Armed Forces prior to turning 18. And more recently, over the last year and a half, we began enrolling or allowed for enrollment of permanent residents within the Canadian Armed Forces. And of course, those two groups of individuals are not permitted to vote. So the CAF elector list, when it's provided to Elections Canada, basically would not include those individuals that have permanent resident status or that are under 18 years of age. If one of those two groups tried to approach a CAF polling station, their names wouldn't be on the list. Of course, individuals, if they're not on the list, like a regular civilian polling station, are permitted to register at the time. And then when that vote was counted by Elections Canada, it would be picked up then. Because this was early stages, we've only just started. We had a very small number. I think it was about 130 permanent residents in the CAF when the general election was called. We expect at the next election to have a much larger number, and so processes will be put in place to request a verification by CAF members that they hold Canadian citizenship and that they are not a permanent resident, which would allow them to vote.
Thank you. Madame Chaba, on comprend là, que
Ms. Chaba, it's not easy to have an exact number of Canadians abroad, but do you know at Global Affairs how many Canadians are registered on your lists, on the diplomatic lists?
Je n'ai pas la chiffre avec.
I don't have the number with me. We have a large number of Canadians who are registered, but usually it's a pretty small percentage of Canadians who live in the country. I can provide the numbers after this meeting, but we need to keep in mind that the numbers are never really the appropriate numbers because there are many Canadians who do not choose to register with the embassy. There was a witness at a previous meeting who told us that she saw in voting from abroad a good opportunity to collaborate internationally. What would your view be on that between countries? It depends a little bit on what the laws and procedures are to vote from abroad. There are countries that offer the option of voting in person, which we do not offer. And so it is possible that we would talk about how things are done. But as I said at the beginning of my remarks, we don't have the responsibility of helping other countries that want to offer in-person voting here in Canada.
Through you, Chair, to Captain Salt. So first, thank you very much for your service. I've been involved in elections. I love that Elections Canada and our democracy seeks to enable any qualified voter, any eligible voter from casting a ballot. And the examples you provide are just extraordinary about how we go the limit to making sure that everybody can vote who's eligible to vote. I'm curious if you received any feedback in terms of possible improvements from military members, any possible improvements to their voting process.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Again, in typical military fashion, we always look to try to improve things. At the end of the election, we spent quite a bit of time with our liaison officers, with our commanding officers, unit elections officers, and Elections Canada representatives to examine what went right, if there was anything that went wrong, and develop lessons learned for future ones. So that is a continuing process, and we always, it's iterative, and we're always looking for ways to improve upon the existing process that we have.
Great. And do you have a second? 1 minute, fabulous. And I'm just curious to either one of you, actually, would there be any benefit to counting the votes at the mission or at a military base? Because the more steps there are, really the more room for error or delay. And so have we ever looked at whether the embassy could be an actual polling station where the votes could be tabulated by, people who had been properly trained?
Would you like me to take that? Okay. So based on the Canada Elections Act, the current legislation sets out that we must provide, that voters abroad can only vote through the special ballot, which gets returned to Canada. It would require significant resources and training, I think, to be able to offer that kind of service. We'd have to, first of all, amend the legislation, I believe, and it would require a fairly high degree of resources for that period to be able to play the role of receiving the votes. And of course, an embassy would be receiving votes from Canadians from across the country. So then how to get those votes back to the appropriate riding would be also a challenge. So I think it's more efficient to be able to collect the ballots and then ship them back for them to be then distributed further within Canada.
Thank you so much. Madame Normandin, 4 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Normandin, 4 minutes, please. Thank you. It's the question I was going to ask. The logistical needs of having polling stations in embassies. I know it would require amendments to the Act and to agreements. Isn't there something in between that could exist? Rather than sending through the mail to Canadians abroad their voting kit, that it be distributed by embassies. The embassy could verify the identity of the person. They have to confirm it with the envelope. So could that be a compromise? There's the time to receive the voting kit, which has an impact. What if it was organized with the embassies so they might have the capacity to save some time? For now, following the legislation that is in place and the agreement between Elections Canada and Global Affairs, it's only Elections Canada that has the right to do that work, to verify whether a person is really eligible to vote and to add them to the list. So it would require changes and it would involve a lot of resources. Our embassies and our consulates have teams to deal with consular cases, and we keep in mind the percentages of consular cases that could arise in a certain country. But that would require a lot of work in addition to the regular consular work that is done by our teams. So we would need to find ways to increase embassy teams during voting periods. So it would require a lot of resources and changes, legal changes, and procedural changes. Thank you very much. Maybe one for you, Captain Salt. It's something pretty specific. In my riding, I have the Military College of Saint-Jean. Not in the last election, but the previous one, there was an issue. The Military College is generally a voting station for civilians. But the students who were there were sent to vote outside of the college. Their polling station was elsewhere, and some had a hard time leaving. They couldn't leave the military college to go vote. So would it be an idea to always have, for Canadian members of the armed forces who are in Canada, that they vote at military colleges and at bases that are reserved to them?
Question, Chair. So in the case of CAF electors, the regulations require that we permit all of our CAF members the opportunity to vote during working hours. So everybody is given that opportunity, and everybody is given that right. If in this particular case, if members of the military college were not able to make their way to a CAF polling station, that would definitely be something that I would have to look into. Separating the polling stations, I think, is a reasonable approach, just because these are special voting ballots and need to be treated differently than you would have at a civilian polling station. But as I mentioned, the RMC students would be permitted to vote in the civilian station that was set up at the college at that particular time, and I suspect many of them probably took advantage of that.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses. Just quickly on a couple of topics, and then, Chair, I wondered if we would have time just at the end to discuss sort of the work plan from now till Christmas. It's a bit up in the air. There's no time for that today? Okay. I'm
happy to speak with Mr. Cooper and Madame Normandan to set out what the notice. It is planned. We will be starting very quickly. We'll be starting our next study. With respect to foreign interference,
because I think there's some concern. Yeah, I think there's some concern, specifically with the foreign interference piece, about the public safety minister's response to this committee's request to come and testify. So anyway, I think that would be appreciated, a conversation between you and the vice chairs, Mr. Chair. I'll leave it at that.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So to the witnesses, global affairs policy, as I understand it. So we've had a discussion recently about the French model of how they do foreign, I hate to use that term, members of parliament that represent citizens abroad, and whether that should be created, a similar system here in Canada should be created. My understanding right now is that global affairs, despite the request of those individuals to have elections for their abroad members of parliament conducted on Canadian soil, as well as other countries around the world where they represent, global affairs, our foreign policy is that we do not allow that to happen. And so if we created a system for this country where we would have members of parliament representing citizens abroad, would that not, in your opinion, be counter to our current foreign policy as exists with respect to these other countries that already have such a system in place?
I would respond to that is ultimately a political decision, whether we want to have members of parliament who represent communities abroad. It is not really a global affairs question, or it's not within global affairs prerogative to determine whether.
And forgive me if I didn't word it correctly. I wasn't asking global affairs opinion on whether we should or shouldn't. I'm just saying right now, global affairs policy is that the French member of parliament representing French citizens living in Canada, they cannot conduct elections here other than at their embassy or consulate locations. Is that in fact our foreign policy?
That is a very good question to which I do not actually have the answer, so I will have to follow up and get back to you. I'm not 100% sure. That is a question I think that falls within our protocol offices.
Sure. Okay. If you would commit to bringing that back to committee, I think that would be very interesting, because there is certainly, we've heard from lots of individuals who think this is the way that Canada should be going, and it would be ludicrous, in my opinion, for us to create a system that we don't support other countries within our borders doing the same thing that we're then hoping to have them do for us. So I'm just trying to understand what our foreign policy is. That would be very much appreciated. In terms of confirmation of representation, I guess, for Canadian citizens living abroad, I would like your position, if possible, on enabling provincial elections to be conducted, or voting in provincial elections to be done. An expert not long ago said to this committee with respect to this study that, well, it's really only important for Canadians abroad to be able to vote in national elections because identity is determined by the nation. That was the wording that they used. I think my colleague from Quebec may feel quite differently about that, as well as individuals who are born in other provinces that have distinct identities within our Canadian framework. So I would like to understand why Global Affairs doesn't allow the voting of provincial elections to be conducted for citizens living abroad, and if that's something that could be changed, what the impact of that might be on our foreign policy.
So I would go back to the Canada Elections Act, which does specify the process for Canadians voting abroad to be provided with special ballots for voting in federal elections. As the situation stands, and based on that legislation and the agreement between Global Affairs and Elections Canada, we are not permitted to provide that type of support for provincial elections. I think it's a question that can be explored. I would go back, though, to the question of resources. Missions abroad are not resourced to be able to provide additional support for federal as well as election support for all of the provinces and territories of Canada. So it would require increased resources to be able to do so.
And as well as legislative change, I'm assuming at both the federal level and also the Provincial Elections Act, I would think would have to be amended in each province in order to have a relationship with Global Affairs. Would that be your understanding?
That would be my understanding, but I would have to check back with our lawyers as to what the situation would be.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Lewis, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I want to thank both our guests here today. Both of you, thank you for your service, Captain Salt and Ms. Shaba, for appearing before us. For Canadians serving abroad, whether it's armed forces or just living overseas, everyone, we're talking about how they deserve a voting process that's accessible, secure, and reliable. And you're showing us how Canada is a bit of an envy of the world in doing that. So we're having this study to talk about timeliness, equitable access. And so possibly I'll start with you, Madame Chaba. Typically, how long does it take for a ballot, once it's received at an embassy or a consulate, a high commission, to be sent to Ottawa? I guess what I'm asking is, does a mission wait until a certain date and then send all of those in, or is it sent in a rolling fashion?
So that question depends a little bit on the location of the embassy or the mission abroad, as well as the expected number of voters. So in large missions where we know that there will be a large number of Canadians voting, I'm thinking of, in Western Europe, for example, we would normally tend to send the ballots in batches. We'll count backwards from the date of the election to know what is the last day that we can send a shipment via courier. But if we are expecting large numbers of ballots, we will send multiple shipments back to headquarters. For missions that are in more distant locations, smaller missions, remote locations, we might not see the same volume. But again, we would go through that same process of working backwards from the elections date to know how much time we need to allow for the courier company to be able to deliver the ballots back to Canada in time.
I think that answered my next question, which sounds like you're saying you work, a specific mission would work backwards to say, because different countries would then set a different date. Global Affairs doesn't say, here is the date. That something must be done. That's okay.
Absolutely. We know that for some very distant locations, more remote locations, it could take quite a while for a package to get back.
Okay, understood. And you mentioned that specific consulates would have higher proportions. Are there stats available as to how many ballots were received and transmitted, let's say, by each embassy? Do you see patterns that's something that we can work with to improve voter turnout?
I don't have such statistics available with me now, but I'm happy to look into that question and get back to the committee as to whether we can provide specific stats. I do know that 164 of our missions abroad did send ballots back to Canada, but I can see if we can find the numbers.
Yeah, I'm just looking to see if there's if the way of allocating resources to see. With my time remaining, Captain Salt, you talked about inside Canada, OutCan deployed. Do you have percentages of votes that would have come from each? Roughly, I'm not looking for stats, but I imagine there's also obviously a sliding scale of complication to that.
Thank you for the question, Chair. I don't have the stats on me. I can say that of the 25,000 special votes that were distributed to Canadians and returned, that approximately 3,200 of them did come in from either OutCan or deployed operations. But I do not believe that we have the detail of where specifically they came from. I would have to refer back to Elections Canada on that one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just looking again for patterns to see if how we can help. Then there would also be polling stations versus mail-in ballots, just in general. Do you have a general proportion of?
Again, I would have to go back to Elections Canada to see if that data exists. Of the 3,200, those were all of the special ballots that are out of the 25,000 and the 3,200. Those were a combination of both ballots that were struck during polling stations, as well as individual ballot kits that were handed out to our members overseas.
Okay, thank you. With about 30 seconds left, maybe I could ask you to split this. Is there a final ask you'd have of the committee in the last time? Captain Salt first, then Chava. The quick. I meant to ask.
Fine. Thank you for the question.
Come on now. I want your 50.
Final ask. We run a pretty tight ship, pardon the pun, with the uniform, and so at this time there's nothing that I can think of from the committee.
Nothing to add on my side. Thank you.
Merci.
5 seconds. The chair appreciates that. I'd like to thank the witnesses for their testimony, and seeing no further business, we are adjourned.
I said point of order before you adjourn.